discuss. Obviously, everything that touches human suffering and pain is difficult to discuss, but for some reason this topic is particularly difficult. And even attorneys, divorce attorneys, will tell you that among all legal matters, it's divorce that becomes very personal, and their clients actually insist that they do not have a relationship with their colleagues on the other across the aisle. So even though many battles in court, you'll have adversarial attorneys, they go to lunch, they know each other, and they don't mix business with personal. But when it comes to divorce particularly, I've heard this from many attorneys, it becomes so personal that if an attorney is in some ways friendly to the so-called other side, that's like considered betrayal. And I'm not going to go through all the harrowing and painful and difficult experiences, and everybody, anyone who knows about it knows, so you don't need me to elaborate. And if you don't know, it's not my job to let you know. Hopefully you'll never know. The reason I want to discuss the topic, however, is because, number one, it's a real issue. And number two, maybe there are things that we can do to preempt in the future in our lives and the lives of our children, situations that may lead to the pain of a breakup in a relationship, what we call divorce. And of course, it's the theme of this week's Torah chapter. And even more interesting is that marriage is not even literally mentioned. We derive the laws of marriage from the laws of divorce. In the Talmud, by studying and analyzing and dissecting the 4 verses in this chapter about divorce, we learn about what marriage is all about, which seems quite odd for many reasons. First of all, you can't get divorced if you weren't married first. So first we should know about marriage before we're told about the opposite. Secondly, in general, just focusing on the negative, why not focus on the positive and then say, in those rare exceptions, or though not so rare, or when there's no choice but divorce, you go that route. But to focus and talk about divorce as if it's a mitzvah, and with marriage basically in the backdrop and only being derived from these laws, seems quite bizarre. So the truth is that any topic of relationships is always complicated. As I mentioned last week, that when I was traveling somewhere and the program director was scheduling my talks, I was going for a lecture tour, so she was trying to figure out what would be like the best topics. She asked me, from my experience, what are people most interested in? And there are topics that are pretty universal, no matter where you go in the world, whatever continent or city or state, everybody's interested in the same things. The first is, number one, is relationships, love, sexuality, intimacy, marriage, and so on. And the second most popular topic is pain and suffering. So I told her this, and she said to me on the phone, she says, those aren't 2 topics, they're one and the same. Meaning that if you've ever been in love or you've fallen in love, there's always the other side of it. The potential, you're vulnerable, the potential of pain, the potential of a loss. When you're not attached to anyone, you can't feel pain. When you are attached, there's always the potential that something will happen, God forbid. And therefore, in a sense, it is a two double-edged sword, meaning that as soon as you open yourself up emotionally, in a good way, in a positive way, there's no other way, but immediately, automatically, you're also opening yourself up, being vulnerable. Now, we all would love to have that magic pill where you could only have one without the other. People have been searching for it just like they're searching for the fountain of youth. If I could only have love and all the beauty and the pleasure without any of the risk, without any of the vulnerability, without any of the unknowns. But that's really, not only is it a contradiction of terms, it's inherently impossible, because the whole meaning of love and relationships is being vulnerable. That's the whole beauty of it. So the word control, to have control in a relationship is an oxymoron. As soon as you're controlling it, it's no longer a relationship. Then it's you who are determining how it's going to work, and you're trying to maneuver to make it work on your terms. That's not called a relationship. That's called you're in the driver's seat, or want to be in the driver's seat, and just want to use the other person for what you need. And as soon as it's inconvenient for you or too risky, you're out, or you don't let the other person have any say. That's not called a relationship. A relationship is a two-way street. It's two people. So I recall somebody once telling me, when I said this in a session I had with a couple, and then I asked to speak to him privately because I saw he was the bigger problem in this situation. So I said to him, so do you want a relationship with your wife, or you don't want a relationship? He says, yeah, as long as she does what I want, I'll love her unconditionally. And he was really serious, because it comes down to that you want to have what you want to have, and you don't really have maybe the confidence and security to see it from another perspective. So you either have to invalidate the other perspective, or you simply shut it down and don't let it be spoken, which, as I said, that's not a relationship. So the Torah, in its own inimitable way, does not shy away from talking about. There are a lot of phone calls coming in here tonight. The Torah does not shy away from talking about raw, tender, and uncomfortable topics. Matter of fact, I remember years ago when I began teaching this class a long time ago, in the previous century, in the 20th century, the latter part of the 20th century, beginning of the 80s. Many of you probably weren't born yet. So the core group of the class were people from the music and arts and entertainment industry. And we had my good friend, who gives a class here every Thursday night, and colleague and student, Philip Namaworth. So when I had met him, he was a Hindu, so he called himself. Brilliant musician, blues player. And I remember after maybe a year or two when him coming to his classes, so he had the first time in his life, he had actually began reading the Torah, the Bible, as it's called. And he came to me like quite disturbed. He says, I finished reading it for the first time, the whole Torah, all the 5 books, after a year. And I am very disturbed by this book. It's not something I never really read. I always dismissed it. But since you intrigued me in this journey, so I began reading it in a serious way. And the way he put it, I don't remember the exact words. He was like flabbergasted, actually, with the dysfunctionality and all the horror of the Bible. And he didn't mean it in a malicious way. He was very innocent. He was saying, like, there's no family, there's no episode, there's no character that's intact. And he began spelling it out. Now, I learned it all my life, so you take it for granted. You almost like forget the drama of it. And he pointed out to me, so you have Adam and Eve, where Cain and Abel, one brother kills a brother. And then you have you get into the whole story with the flood. And then you have the story of the Noah and his children. The children castrate Noah. And then you have the fights in Abraham's home, and the fights in Isaac's home. And it's on and on and on. Jacob's children, who are supposed to already be now tzaddikim, so they sell their brother into slavery. First they try to kill him, want to kill him. And then when you get into the story of Moses, there's constant betrayals, incest. It's like maybe the worst type of soap opera you've ever seen. If you really played this out on screen, it's unbelievable dysfunctionality going on, at least on the surface level. And he said to me, and there's no happy ending. They finally get into the wilderness. They're on their way already to the promised land. So you think everything's going to work out? No. They start complaining. First there's no food, then they don't have bread, then they don't have meat, and then they don't have water, and then they don't like the water, they don't like the bread they get. And in every chapter you have another complaint. Moses sends scouts to Israel. They come back with a bad report. And that's a whole new parsha starts with that. Then Korach's rebellion, Moses' cousin, and mutiny. On and on and on. And when you finally finish the Torah, you think, okay, the last sentence will be a happy ending. You go to a movie, usually you think, okay, the end is going to be happy no matter how bad it was. No, Moses dies in the wilderness. All the Jews die in the wilderness. They never end up in the promised land. The last verse in the Torah talks about a eulogy for Moses, how he ends up in the wilderness, buried. and that he was the greatest prophet that ever lived. And that's it. And the Jews end up stranded on the east bank of the River Jordan. And if you stop there, you don't even know what's going to happen next. So you read the book of Joshua, which is after the Torah, after the 5 books of the Torah, then you just begin to learn, okay, now Joshua leads them they cross the river and they enter into the promised land. So you have a whole Torah that talks about a promised land, and you never end up there. I don't remember exactly how Philip dramatized it, but it definitely struck me, because here was a man reading it in a very innocent way, without any preconceived notions, and this is his impression. Like it's a very, you read certain spiritual books, they make you feel good. You read certain chapters, it's not very good for pleasant dreams, certain episodes. Obviously, there are many beautiful verses, many beautiful insights and mitzvahs, and really the foundation of civilization is established in the Torah. But when it comes down to the people, the personalities involved, it's hardly peaceful at all. There's constant conflict. And as when he said it to me, when he asked me the question, I was thinking about it, and then it struck me that he was right on target, and it's actually very true. And I was going to go give him some type of cute answer that he's misreading the whole thing. It's a little difficult to dismiss. It's not once. It's like, as I said, almost every episode has some what's the word for it besides drama? Some calamity, yeah, some tension, and so on. And what struck me was very simple. We say every night in the evening prayer that Torah is chayenu v'orach yemenu. The Torah is our life and our sustenance. Torah is meant to be a blueprint for life, not meant to be some type of angelic mandate for angels in heaven. It's about life, real life. And the Torah, in its stories, reflects real life. This is exactly what life is like. And maybe when we're young and naive, we don't know that yet. But you go through life, who does not suffer loss and betrayal and cruelty? So the Torah, without even getting into the details of each story, just the mere fact, when you read it, it's very real. You're not getting some type of lovey-dovey, feel-good type of book that's just going to make you feel good and escapism into some fantasy world. It's real stuff, real life. Brothers can hurt each other, sisters can hurt each other, parents can hurt children, children can hurt parents, communities can hurt communities, people go to war. This is real life. But, and this is the real big but, the Torah doesn't, however, condone that. It just addresses it and says, and yet, despite these challenges, and despite that life can be so cruel and painful and suffering, here you have a blueprint that can help you not only make sense of it, but learn to transcend and live a meaningful life, live a life of purpose. Because on our own, what would really be the conclusion of most people, if you look at life and its absurdities, what does absurdity lead to? To an absurd conclusion, a life of chaos. We're not going anywhere. The more things change, the more they stay the same. A generation comes and a generation goes, and nothing new under the sun. People have been hurting each other forever. And it really creates basically fundamental resignation, fatalism. That would be naturally where a person, when you've been hurt long enough, and you keep seeing it again and again, that's where you usually escape to. Most of us do not have necessarily the fortitude or the courage to say, I'm just going to take on life no matter what happens. Not true. We get worn down. Even by not such serious things, especially serious pain and suffering. And the Torah says, listen, if the Torah denied or did not discuss painful situations, then you would say, it's a beautiful Torah, but it doesn't address my life. My life is not so beautiful as this. And there's one chapter, especially one story, one episode, where Moses, when God appears to Moses for the first time, so we all know the story of the burning bush. He appears in a burning bush, a thorn bush. So the Medrash asks a question, and that's where God tells Moses that I'm choosing you to be the Redeemer and to lead the Jews out of their oppression in Egypt. So the Medrash asks the question, why did God appear in a thorn bush, of all places? You'd think God appears to Moses to be in a pleasant in an apple tree, in a nice flowers, not some type of beautiful setting. And the Medrash has a very fascinating answer. The answer is because God was preempting a question Moses he knew was going to ask. If God appeared to Moses and invited him out to a nice restaurant or some other beautiful place, a beautiful ambiance and venue, Moses would have said, that's very nice that you take me out to a beautiful place. But here you have a nation that's suffering. Do you also appear in people suffering, or are you only there when things are going well? I'm paraphrasing, but the Medrash says, so God preempting that said, I'm going to appear to Moses in a thorn bush, the lowliest of bushes, that bears no fruit, that is prickly, that is a symbol of death. Thorn bush, a symbol of a desert, parched, where there's no life. And that's what I will appear, and I will show him that, yes, I am with you also in your pain, not only in your joy. You think about this, is a very powerful medrash. First of all, very contemporary, because that's the biggest question everyone asks when they suffer. Where's God when I need him? So God was saying to Moses, I'm not just sending you to go to Egypt. I'm with you, I go with you. And whether you see me or not, I'm there with you. I'm not getting into the discussion, where is God and why don't we feel it and so on. That's not really the theme here. I just wanted to make the point. So the Torah basically, by talking about real life and real families and being very open and blunt about it, not trying to deify. Look, the great people like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, the Torah doesn't just talk about their virtues. It also talks about painful situations they experienced, telling us that this is real. This is real life. Real life is tough, can be very cruel, insensitive, and yet there's hope. And yet you can bring light even in this dark place. That's the bottom line message. So in a strange way, the Torah's conclusion is actually in a way a blessing. Even though it concludes that they don't enter the promised land, the Torah is saying still, even though you might not live up, maybe all your aspirations and dreams may not be fulfilled, but there's still purpose in your life. So it's not always on your terms. There's a bigger mysterious script going on. And I can go on and elaborate this, but it was all as an introduction to go back to the topic of marriage and divorce, and love and relationships. So the Torah doesn't mince words. It addresses things very bluntly and very directly. So to truly appreciate this whole theme of divorce, Kabbalah of divorce, marriage, the questions I addressed earlier, I want to step back a moment to the month we are in now, because it's also connected to this month. This is called the month of love, Elul. Ani l'dodi v'dodi li. Elul, the Hebrew letters, is an acronym for I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. It talks about a relationship. I mentioned before, relationship is reciprocal. There's two people here. It takes two to tango. I am to my beloved is to me. So Ani l'dodi v'dodi li in the Hebrew. And the theme of Elul as well is about reconciliation and about love and the relationship between the divine and the mundane, between God and human being, and the human race, between heaven and earth, between matter and spirit. Why? Because you may know the story if you've following 60 Days, my book, or are familiar with the narrative behind the scenes of this month that leads us into the high holidays. We know the story is that Moses went up on the mountain to receive the Torah. When he comes back down, 40 days later, the Jewish people had betrayed God, and they built a golden calf, an idol, to replace God. Basically, total betrayal. And just 39 days after they had heard, do not have false gods. So Moses goes back on the mountain. He shatters the tablets, goes back on the mountain to ask for forgiveness, to reconcile between the chassan and the kala, between the bride and the groom. The Torah compares God to a groom and the people to the bride. Actually, sometimes also the other way around. But the point is, it's a relationship. And Moses sees it his mission to mend the rift. There's a major betrayal here, equivalent of adultery, where the people chose God and then they rejected him and chose a golden calf instead. God was furious, kavyachol, however God expresses fury, but in our language, for good reason, because here this relationship was betrayed. And Moses sees himself as the shadchan, as the matchmaker, who brought these two together. So he sees his role to figure out a way how to gain forgiveness from God and find a way to reconcile between this couple, heaven and earth. And actually, the reason he broke the tablets, some people think Moses lost control. He got so angry. He broke. No, it was quite deliberate and intentional. The reason he broke the tablets was because Rashi says, because the tablets were like the contract, the marriage contract, the ksuba. And Moses realized that the people, he was a good attorney, he realized the people had heard the second commandment, do not build false gods, but they hadn't signed the contract yet, which means they hadn't received the tablets until he would deliver it to them. So what he did was he tore up the contract. That's what Rashi says in Pashaki Sisa. He tore up the contract. That way he can come back to God and say, look, they heard you say it, but they didn't sign it yet. Now obviously he was not trying to be cute. It was a way of buying time. But it was also showing to what lengths Moses would sacrifice himself to gain the forgiveness, to regain the love. God basically said at that point, I want to divorce these people and go build yourself another nation. He tells Moses, they messed up, go find another nation, let's start from scratch. Which sounds like a good idea, if you think about it. Moses was not involved. He was up in the mountain when it happened. And yet Moses says, absolutely no. You divorce them, you can divorce me too, Moses basically says. Erase my name from the Torah if you choose to divorce them. And I don't want to associate with you. Which, if you think about that, is quite, besides chutzpah, it's and sacrilegious. It's like, what does that mean exactly? He's talking to God here. We're not talking about some guy or something who's angry. You're talking about the God. Moses is ready to cut off his lifeline to God. And Moses knew who God was. He was a serious man. And he's ready to sacrifice his connection because of a sinful people. Because they clearly had sinned. Moses did not say they didn't sin. He didn't say they made a mistake. He knew the severity of what they had done. But what Moses also knew, and this is what makes Moses a Moses and so unique, is that knew that love, even if it can sometimes seem completely concealed, it may still be there. And he knew, absolutely confident, that God chose these people because he truly loved them. And even if he was betrayed, somewhere deep inside, he could dig and he'll find the love again. And vice versa. He absolutely believed in it. And he would not take no for an answer. And the month of Elul is when Moses finally prevails. And of course it concludes on Yom Kippur, because this month of Elul is when Moses goes up in the beginning of Elul, last week. And 40 days later, comes down on Yom Kippur. So from the new moon of Elul, Rosh Chodesh Elul, to Yom Kippur is exactly 40 days. And on Yom Kippur, Moses comes down with a second set of tablets, a new contract, and this time one that will never be shattered, permanence. And he finds a way to create an eternal bond, an eternal marriage between God and the people that can never be reversed. So what you see from here is a few things. First of all, I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt that said this about women. I don't know how she fits into this conversation about Moses, but why not, We'll elevate her soul, wherever it is. So she said, a woman's like a tea bag. You don't know how strong she is until you put her into hot water. Okay. Now, what about a man? I don't know. A man, when it's hot, he just yells, it's hot, I guess, and uncomfortable. That sounds a little sexist. In other words, anti-male, maybe. The point is this, that we do not know the strength of something until it's challenged. This doesn't mean that we look forward to challenges and that we embrace them. It just means that when something happens in your life, not the way you planned it, or not the way you like it to work out. So you could just say to yourself, why did it have to happen? And become very bitter about it, and very angry, and full of regrets that if you did something differently, maybe this wouldn't have happened, etc. Get consumed with all the mistakes you may have made or others may have made, all the grievances you have of why you got yourself in this situation. And it may even be true that there may be someone to blame. But blaming doesn't necessarily solve your problem. That's the problem. That's the issue. So the Torah teaches us that when you're challenged, what healthy people do, instead of looking for a scapegoat, correctly or incorrectly, and you don't go into the blame game, what you do is you figure out how you can find and discover deeper resources to make it through this. And you'll see, challenges, the rule, brings out the worst in people and the best in people. Maybe I should say, or the best in people. Challenges in any situation, a crisis, you'll see a person at their worst or at their best. Maybe even a combination of the two at times. I want to reiterate that, and this is not a justification for pain or suffering. It's just the reality of life. Now, why is it this way? So, follow along. This is a philosophical answer. So it doesn't really satisfy emotions, but it's important to know why it's this way. So there's an expression in the Talmud that goes like this. Hazayis, the olive, Ein Moitzi Shamri, does not produce oil until you press it. You want olive oil, you need to press the olive. And it's a whole science, a whole art, pressing an olive, the different ways of pressing it. The first oil that comes out, the second oil, and so on. The same is true psychologically, that if we had no deadlines and we had no pressure, how much would we produce? I speak for myself. If I had no deadlines, I'd be in big trouble. I don't know about you, but everybody's got the procrastinator, the inner procrastinator. Some are obviously more professional procrastinators than others. Anyone here like a really great procrastinator? Yeah? Anyone that's not? So a procrastinator is the person that says, if you can do it tomorrow, why do it today? And the non-procrastinator is the one that says, if you could do it today, why do it tomorrow? So answer that question and you'll know right away which category you fit in. There are more procrastinators, I think, in the world than none. Now, procrastination per se is not always a bad thing. I remember hearing that Norwegian cruise line advertisement on the radio. You ever hear that one? It's a parody. They call it PA, like AA, PA, Procrastinators Anonymous. So it's a group. I mean, you hear it on the radio. You don't see it. You just hear a guy gets up. He says, "My name is Jerry," whatever his name is, and everyone says, "Welcome, Jerry. Welcome." And I've been procrastinating now for 2 years, 3 months, and 6 days and 4 hours. Okay, and finally I hit rock bottom. I decided enough is enough. And everyone said, "What happened? What happened?" So he said, "Well, I heard this advertisement for Norwegian cruises that said that if you sign up by November 1st, you get a 20% discount." And of course I signed up by November 2nd. I woke up. And I said, "That's it. That's rock bottom. No more procrastination for me." Anyway, that was a cute way of expressing, I welcome the rabbi. So, procrastination. If we had no deadlines, if we had no pressure, there would be no production, like the oil, like the olive. So even though none of us like pressure, and nobody likes deadlines, like to have another day, another week, another year, but it's the experience of it, the fact is it brings out deeper resources. And even in the worst type of suffering, and again, not a justification, you see it brings out either the worst in people, bitterness and anger, and unbelievable even inner destructiveness, and other people glow in ways you can never glow without having gone through the fire, so to speak. Now, I can tell you my own personal experience, the most refined people I know in my life are people who suffer terribly. And I'm not saying that to like, placate the suffering. On the contrary, people who've gone through unbelievable challenges and made it through, there's something about them that is a refinement you don't see in people who haven't suffered like that. At the same time, of course, I don't know the statistics. Many people who suffer don't necessarily get through it and remain in a very dark place all their lives. Now, is this a justification? Absolutely not. But what is the reason for it? So as I said, I wanted to just share a philosophical thought on this with a disclaimer that philosophy does not respond to a bleeding heart. A great brain cannot speak to a crying heart. It just doesn't work. But nevertheless, at times, maybe when we're not such in the throes of the pain, it's good to have what they call the cognitive life raft, where you're able to, for a moment, maybe escape into your mind, because it helps sometimes just to have a little. Escapism isn't always a bad thing, as long as it doesn't become a trap and doesn't become an addiction. Sometimes we need to get away from a difficult situation and just escape from it so you can gather strength. So in Hasidic culture, the idea of studying deep philosophical Hasidic ideas doesn't necessarily mean you could always reach there, but it helps you sometimes get some sanity in an absurd world. When you see so much absurdity and so much pain and suffering, to sit down and read a beautiful story and focus on a profound thought, or sing a beautiful Hasidic melody, it can be dismissed by a cynic as escapism, but it also helps you transcend. It's a form of transcendence, to get away from the hard, difficult elements that we sometimes immerse ourselves in. So why do we need to have, why do we need pressure to extract oil from an olive? And the answer is very simple, in a way, but very profound. Because we live in a world where potential is trapped. So as I said, philosophical. Follow along for a second. In Hasidic philosophy, there's a concept called, we talk about the divine, so you say, expression, ein kayach chaser poel. It means something that is potential and the divine is like it's actual. Because God is complete and therefore has everything, encompasses all potentials. So a human being, because we're incomplete, if something remains in the potential state, it doesn't mean anything. It's like the Alter Rebbe once said to a chassid who said, he was a potential great scholar. He said, the Alter Rebbe told him, if you applied yourself, you'd really be a giant. He says, no, Rebbe, I could learn. I have the potential to do so. He says, so the Rebbe answered him, well, just like a thief is not someone who could steal, but someone who steals, a scholar is not someone who could be a scholar, but someone who is a scholar. So in this material world, just because there's potential does not mean anything. On the divine level, because there's seamlessness and there's no impediments between one state and another state, so if something is there, its potential and actual are considered to be one and the same. But once a reality like ours was created, where potential remains concealed, it really also means truth remains concealed. Everything remains concealed in this universe. The question is, how are you going to extract it? How are you going to free it? So look at human nature. How many people actually go and are driven and motivated to go dig if things are going well? However, when you're pressured and things aren't going so well and you need to be creative and innovative, then suddenly you come up with the most brilliant ideas. They say that war is the father of all invention. Most of our technologies would not exist if there was no war. Because when you go to war, there's a real battle at heart, and you need to really deal with adversarial forces, and so you become very creative and innovative to protect yourself, because life is at stake. So we're talking about actualizing potential. It requires a certain element of pressure. And the more pressure, the deeper you can reach. So if this world was a perfect world, it was a divine garden, and there was a seamlessness, you wouldn't need pressure. Look at newborn children. Newborn children, just by nature, don't need anyone to wake them up to be enchanted by the world around them. It's their nature. They see the world as a exciting place. Everything for them is a novelty. But once, at some point, we get, let's call it, infected by the toxins of this universe, both physically and also psychologically, we develop a thing called lethargy, a thing called, I'm relaxing type of thing. And as a result, what happens is the potential remains trapped inside. And therefore you need something, some catalyst, some pressure, some tension to release it. Tension, resolution. It's the secret of life. The breath. You exhale, you inhale. The heart is a pump, contracts and expands. And as the pressure, the tension, and the resolution that follows, which is the secret to all growth. Every coach, whether it's in sports or in life or in any form of fashion, is all about teaching a person how to pressure themselves or someone else pressure them to bring out the deepest strengths. And this is why love does not come easily. Because love is a true expression of reality in this world. What do I mean by reality? When a person is in love, some of the most beautiful parts of yourself will emerge. Look what people are ready to do for others that they love. They would never do it without love. How far they would go, to what extent, sacrifices. And I don't only mean that in a negative sense, like a sacrifice, I mean even a positive sense. Because when a person has that rush, has that sentiment, has that feeling within them, it's like the whole world looks differently. And you're ready to do anything. But because you're digging into a place that's called potential, there's always risk. It comes hand in hand with it. Yes, every marriage has a risk of divorce. And not just divorce in the technical sense, also emotional divorce. How many people are married today but in the technicality they're divorced, emotionally and every other way. They may be physically together because it's convenient for the children, or the unknown evil is worse, whatever the reason is. But for a relationship to thrive, it needs to have, as I said earlier, that vulnerability. So the Torah, in its own powerful way, the reason it talks about divorce and not about marriage is because, as I said earlier, it's very, very direct and blunt. You want to really understand, appreciate love, let's look at the pain side of it. Not conceal it or hide it, but let's look at it. Because God was ready to divorce the Jewish people, that's why we have a Yom Kippur today that says nobody can be divorced. Think of that paradox. So there's a law, I think also in secular law, but in the Torah law for sure, it says shtar sheyatza lav irer, which means a contract that somebody challenged, appealed. So let's say two people sign a contract, and then one party goes and challenges and says this contract is not valid. So the Torah says, the Torah law goes like this: if it's upheld after an appeal, after a challenge, it no longer can be challenged again. Which essentially is the basis of all law. For instance, a verdict can be appealed once, twice, 3 times, but there's some point where you can't appeal it anymore. Go to the Supreme Court. The United States, that's the final place. Once they rule, you can never appeal because it's a matter of, they say, ein ledover sof, which means you continuously appeal and there'd never be any resolution. But the point I want to make is this, that the challenge is what made the contract much stronger. Had it not been challenged, it could also always be challenged. You could always say we wouldn't know what it would be like under pressure. And the same thing with human beings. When a relationship is challenged, you can see it as, you wish it wasn't, and you wish it would go away. But you could also see it as an opportunity, because this is now an opportunity to see what this is made of, what you are made of, and what the other person is made of. Again, it may not be pleasant, but the results of it will give you insight and a connection that you can never get without the challenge. So though we don't justify the building of the golden calf, but as a result of it, and this is stated in quite a few books, we are here as a Jewish people never to be destroyed ever again. Had Moses, and Moses knew the stakes, had Moses not challenged God and allowed God to divorce the people and go choose another nation, Moses knew the stakes. That means that nothing is eternal in this world. Because who says the second nation wouldn't make also a mistake? We're all human beings. Everybody makes mistakes. Moses realized how high those stakes were, and he said to God, look, you created a human race. They're flawed. You made them imperfect. And yes, they make mistakes, and they're accountable for their mistakes. But you cannot tell me that because they make mistakes, that's why you're going to divorce them. Because then shouldn't have created them with the potential to make mistakes. And God responds, so what do you want me to do? So Moses, I want you to forgive them. And God said, what do you mean forgive them? They brought upon this upon themselves. I didn't do it to them. They're the ones that betrayed me. I didn't do anything to them. And Moses said, yes, but you have to dig deeper. When there's a challenge to the relationship, when things are going well, it's no big thing that everybody loves each other. When there's a challenge and now there's been a betrayal, what happens now? And it took Moses 80 days to convince God, if you could call it that, to prevail, let's put it this way, to dig deep enough within the God personality to elicit that God said yes. And on Yom Kippur, we will say Yom Kippur night, right after the Kol Nidre, right at the beginning of the Yom Kippur service, where God says to Moses, Salachti kidvarecha, I forgive them as you've asked me, as you've stated. Which is God basically acknowledging to Moses that you're right. But what Moses got in return was one word, it's called hope. Hope. Imagine a human race, imagine a human being without hope. None of us are immune to the mistakes of life. We're all going to make mistakes. The question is, what happens afterwards? Some become victims to their mistakes and they start making more mistakes to cover up for the earlier mistakes. Some ignore it all and just forget, go into denial. And the rare few have hope. And they learn to do what Moses did. They learn to repair. So, when the Romans, and before them the Babylonians, went into the temple and destroyed the temple on Tisha B'Av, so it says when the Babylonians entered, they saw the ark, the holy ark. And the holy ark had two kruvim, had two cherubs. Two images. On top of the ark were two images of a boy and a girl. Two children. And it says in the Talmud that when God and the people were close to each other, these two cherubs, these two faces would face each other, symbolic of intimacy. And when God and the people were not close to each other, were distant from each other, the two cherubs would turn back to back. Symbol of distance, like turning your back to someone. When the Babylonians entered, the Talmud says the cherubs were facing each other. And everybody wonders, what does that mean? God is allowing them to destroy the temple because of the sins of the people. He's about to divorce them. So why are the cherubs facing each other? And they explain, is because in the darkest moments is when you see the true love between two. God was not separating himself from the people. He was saying, we have no choice. You, the people, have destroyed your own temple through your own hatred, through your own mistakes, iniquities, flaws. But I'm going to take out the wrath on the kilo aposal etzim va'avonim. I will take out my wrath on the wood and the stones, and you will go into exile. But this is a symbol of my connection with you, not my separation from you. So it's like, think of it this way, like hypothermia. I know you're wondering what's the connection. I'll tell you in a moment. Especially children that fall under in ice or freezing water. So once upon a time, they did not know the concept called condition called hypothermia. And when a person falls on the water is too cold, it will obviously can cause death. And there were incidents just 40, 50 years ago where people were declared dead, especially children, as I said. For some reason it happens to children more than to adults, because their heart stopped, their brain stopped, and all the vital signs were not there. They were declared dead. Until, I don't know the exact episode, but there was one instance where they were literally ready to take away the child, and then one doctor noticed a twitch or some movement somewhere. And what was discovered was the condition called hypothermia, which is this: that a body, because a body will do everything possible to protect itself, so basically all the symptoms that we have of pain, illness, and so on, even though pain and illness are obviously negative things, but it's all the body going into a certain emergency state to protect itself. In its most extreme form, hypothermia is a condition where the body will shut all the vital signs and just keep one glimmer, something alive, so till that child is taken out of the cold and the freezing temperature it's in. Which is the same reason why a body, God forbid, goes into shock, or all other symptoms. So the symptom itself, obviously, we don't see as a positive, but if you think about it for a moment, think about pain for a moment. Any pain you may feel in your body. Why do we feel pain? Because our nerves are alive. And our nerves are telling us that there's something wrong. So if you have a toothache, the nerve is telling you that there's some infection that's getting too close to the nerve, and do something about it. Any pain. You stub your toe, yes, it's painful, but the pain is telling you that something happened. Now, if it's a temporary pain, hopefully it goes away. But if it's not, it's a warning signal. Take away pain from human beings, or basically numb the nerves, we would be all probably not alive today. Because you have no warning signal, nothing to tell you something, to do something about it. So yes, we would love to get rid of the symptom, so we have painkillers, Band-Aids, which is fine for a temporary situation, which is only temporary. But if it's a sign of something deeper, a painkiller is not exactly the solution. So would anybody say pain is a good thing? No, but pain is a sign of a body that is healthy, telling you there's something you should be aware of. No different than in times of challenge, where you have those, what do they call them? They call them those, the night callers, or the night criers, who would watch out at the border. If there was an enemy coming, they would start the yelling, or they would have torches, or they had bugles, or whatever it is. What were they called? There was a name for it. And every today there's a technology of other ways to warn us of something happening. So, yeah, like a night watchman type, right? So, in the context of love and marriage, the Torah says, let's talk about divorce. Not because it's an easy thing to talk about, not because it's something we want to talk about, not because even we're preparing for it. But let us talk about the potential of two people who can break apart in a relationship even though they were so in love. And the Torah is trying to tell us, as I said, on the cosmic level, what happened the same with God and the people, which was like husband and wife. And there was almost a divorce. And it was Moses, because of the potential divorce, that Moses taught the people and taught God of how you can reach deeper and create a deeper relationship. So what does that mean practically in our lives here today? Since no one really has statistics about things like this, it's always an intriguing question. People get divorced. Could it have been saved? People wonder, they're haunted sometimes by questions like that. Some argue that given the right time, and had something been nipped in the bud, that many relationships could have been saved. And not just saved as to remain a miserable marriage, to create a loving relationship, a loving marriage. in our day and age today, because divorce is such a high rate of divorce, it's become almost like not just acceptable, it's almost like, people are just not meant to be for each other. Or we've outlived each other. We loved each other for 10 years, 20 years, less than that, whatever, more. And that's it, we move on. The challenge the Torah would give to such an attitude is that people who speak that way probably know nothing about what love is. And I bring back what I've always discussed about what I once mentioned here, many times mentioned about what I once gave a class to the Learning Annex. I think I mentioned it last week as well. And I asked the group, it was like 50 people, how many of you believe in love forever after? And only one young lady raised her hand. So out of, let's say, 50 people, 52 people, one person. And of course, she became the target of the focus of attention. And people started snickering. It means they asked you probably were never in a relationship. Like how could you have been in a relationship and just think there's love forever after? So you're a bit naive, or more than a bit. But it ensued a very interesting discussion, dialogue ensued from this. Not relevant so much to what I want to say here, but the point I want to make is this, something I said last week and the last few weeks. Our attitude to divorce is going to be directly predicated, direct result of our attitude to love. So it's all about our assumptions. If everything in this material world erodes and changes and is temporary, why should love and marriage not be also in that category? Everything. Our food, our money, our health, our bodies, everything ages in this world. Nothing remains where it was yesterday. And so as time passes, why would we not apply the same formula to relationships and love? I grew out of it. We've changed. I've changed. She's changed. The answer to that question is correct. Based on that assumption that love is just another physical reality, it's correct. It will erode like everything physical erodes. However, if the assumption is a different one, which is that love is an eternal force, because it's not a physical power, it's a spiritual one, and you access the spirituality of love, it's not just about convenience, comfort zones, and personal instant gratification, then who says it has to die? But that's a very threatening thought to many people, because that's really raising the bar. Most people don't want to think like that. I mean, maybe when we're young and idealistic, it's a nice dream. But as we get older, it's very, very, very challenging question to answer, because then you say to yourself, so what am I missing? Why is it that, I don't know the statistic, 40%, 50% rate in the United States is the highest divorce rate in the world? Why is it that 1 out of 2 people are unable to achieve that? And that means that the rest doesn't mean they've achieved it, as I said earlier. They may not be divorced technically, but everything but technical they are. So where does it leave us? And this is another interesting study in human nature. There's something strange about people, that misery loves company. If no one's succeeding, you're much happier with your own failure than if others are succeeding. Because then you can say, hey, I'm no different, everybody's failing. They tell the story about this guy comes to a rabbi with an animal, a behemoth, and asks the rabbi if it's kosher. The rabbi checks it out and says, no, the animal's not kosher. So, the rabbi says it's not kosher, so therefore it's a loss of $10,000. But he accepts it, he swallows it, and that's it. The same guy, they tell the story, a few months later has a din Torah, which is a conflict. They come to a rabbinic court, same rabbi. This time it's a conflict over $5,000. No animal involved here. 2 people. And they're arguing. And the rabbi listens to all the arguments and listens to the evidence and blah, blah. And finally the rabbi rules not according to this guy, but according to the other. He says, you owe him the $5,000. And he gets angry at the rabbi and says, you're corrupt. The guy bribed you. Something wrong here, and he just can't accept the ruling. So the question is asked, this same guy accepted this rabbi's ruling about the animal for a loss of $10,000, and he can't accept the ruling of the rabbi for a loss of $5,000. And the answer given is because what bothers him is not that he lost the money, is that the other person won the money. So he's able to accept that the animal was not kosher, so he lost it. There's something about people, it makes us feel better, and it's weird, and it's almost embarrassing, that if other people also don't succeed. Because then it doesn't make you so glaringly inadequate. So something about relationships I find, and I say this with pain in a way, because I speak to many people about this topic, and I see standards have been lowered very profoundly. The saddest thing to see is when a person has written themselves off. When you see someone has great potential, has the capacity to love or other potential, and they've written themselves off, not just they say it's not just me, the whole world is that way. It's one of the saddest things to see, because if you see with your own eyes the person's got it in them, and they're telling you that they don't believe it, it's like you become your own worst enemy. And I find in the area of love and relationships, because there's been so much failure and disappointment, what many of us do is we lower the bar and we lower the standards, because it's just too painful to accept that it's really possible to have something really beautiful. It's much easier to say, you know what, that's a very naive idealism to think that something can be beautiful like that. Children think that way. It's not the way it is. Then you're not so disappointed when you don't find it. Well, the Torah, whether we like it or not, is not going to buy into that conformity. And therefore, bless you, and therefore makes it very, very loud and clear that we can talk about divorce, because I'm not afraid to talk about divorce, says the Torah, because I know that the real point here is not about divorce, it's about finding the deepest type of love. And that's where the laws of marriage are derived from divorce. Just like the laws of Yom Kippur teach us about hope. And it came all out of a potential divorce, or almost at the edge of it. Love, the deepest love, emerges from the deepest challenges. Now, although this is a rare instance, but there are instances. And I've seen it personally myself, and I've been blessed to even be part of it. I've seen people who came to a point where their relationship, everybody wrote off. Therapists, years and years of domestic challenges they had, personality clashes, the works. But in the few rare instances where things turned around you know what happened? Both of them, independently, dug deeper and found a place that they were not able to access before. And that's what kept them together. And I could show you, I know people with names and families and stuff like that. So many of us will say, okay, that's an exception, it's an anomaly, rarely happens, etc., etc. Yes, it really happens, but not necessarily because it's an anomaly, maybe because most of us don't have the courage to dig deeper. You know, as we get older, we say to ourselves, you know what, I'm giving up on a lot of my dreams. That's what most of us do. You see, but I grew up and I saw some real Torah people in my life, and it didn't matter whether they were 60, 70, 80, or 90, they never gave up on dreams that they had when they were 20. And not because they were not, you can't blame, you can't accuse them of being naive because they're no longer 20. Because there was a spark in the soul, a certain connection that did not die, that unfortunately dies in many of us as we get older. It's not age that kills us, it's our attitude. It's an attitude of what you're really capable of. Now, obviously, if you've never exposed to what potential you really can achieve, you could say, how am I to blame? It's true, you're not to blame. Because if you don't know how much you can achieve, how could you ever expect that you'll go there? Well, that's why, as I said last week in the class, it's incumbent upon us to explore and find greater horizons. It's true, of course, if you never saw a greater horizon, you won't even know how to climb. You won't be motivated to climb. You won't even know there's something to climb, to reach toward. So to me, sitting here together with you this evening, and in general, when you study Torah, you go into the deeper spiritual dimensions of it, it's really about one thing, and one thing only. Well, it's more than one thing, but one primary thing. It's to see that you have more than you think you have inside of you. If I cannot achieve that in my class here, I would really consider this a failure. You know, you can inspire people, you can manipulate people, you can make them laugh emotionally. There's a lot of ways, there's a lot of tricks of the trade when you're a teacher and a public speaker and stuff like that. But what you cannot fake is, can you teach people to have confidence in themselves, to believe that they're capable more than they thought of when they came in this room. And I don't only say this, I'm not only saying this myself to you, I also say it to myself. Because when you put yourself in a position where you can see and you believe, and you, in a real way, a realistic way, and therefore can expect from somebody more than they expect of themselves, or what they expected yesterday of themselves, it forces you also to go beyond yourself. That's how it is. It's getting out of the comfort zone. Getting out of the comfort zone. Sometimes you need to do it through humor. Sometimes you do it through provocation. And sometimes you do it through shock treatment. I don't mean that in the literal sense. I mean, by shocking people with something that is disarming. Whatever it takes. Because, we don't want to wait, as I said earlier, for God to strike or for something to happen in our life that's so painful, and that forces you out of your comfort zone. Much better get out of it on your own before you're forced to get out of it. Unfortunately, again, the way of all flesh, the way of most flesh, is that we do not make a real move until things don't work well. When you're comfortable and you think you're on top of the mountain, you're on top of it all, top of your game, you show me how many people are really going to excel. People don't excel then. Excellence, innovation, creativity always comes out when there's pressure. When there's competition, when there's other forms of pressure. Now, we hate pressure, but it brings the best out of us. So in this whole context of discussing and getting it back to a practical life, yes, there's a therapeutic approach when a couple are not getting along with each other. You can figure out all kinds of ways to try to, let's put it this way, create Band-Aids and short-term remedies. And I'll never forget that couple that came to me. They were going to therapy for many years. Things weren't working. And as a last resort, they came to me. I don't know why I'm the last resort, but that's what happened. So I asked them, so what happened in this different therapy that you've gone through? Well, most of it wasn't very helpful, they said, but there was one therapist that was not bad. So I was intrigued by what that meant, like, if it wasn't bad, like, why didn't it work? So they told me that this was a woman therapist who asked them both, I mean, briefly, this was over months and months, but bottom line, it was, you can call it the list therapy. List, L-I-S-T. I'll tell you why in a second. She asked them both, and you follow along, this gets very complicated. She asked them both to take out a piece of paper and write down, like from 1 to 10, 1 being the most important, your most important needs in life. Okay. So 1 being the most important need, 10 being a need that is not that important, more optional. Maybe 10 being the most optional, etc. Then the next list was to mark off what the other person, does the other person provide you with these needs? Do they fill these needs? Also from 1 to 10. If they fill the need completely, then it's 1. If 10, if they don't really fill it at all. And 5 if it's like, so in other words, if it's a number 1 need of yours, and you mark the other person as a 10, that means you're really suffering, because it's so important to you, but the other person gives you nothing. And they started creating these lists. Then came the next category of lists, which was, what do you think you're providing for the other person? And then they compared lists to see, she thinks I'm giving her nothing of this, and I think I'm giving all of this. So they really started seeing how they simply don't even understand each other. They're completely off base. Anyway, you can get the idea. It gets even more complicated with the list being compared and the number 1 and the number 10. So I said, so what happened? So they said, well, we had these lists, and I had mine on the refrigerator. The guy says, I had mine in the office. And every time something happened, we were running to these lists to look at, oh, that's a number 1. I can't believe that I did that. Well, this was a number 10. And they were looking at each other's lists to see, to try to, in other words, improve. If I'm not doing anything for my spouse in an area that she needs so much, let me try to make it from 10 to 9 to 8 and so on. Okay, so and they said, well, it was working for a while, because they definitely were more sensitive to each other, and they were definitely recognizing stuff that they were not noticing before. So why didn't it work, I asked them. They said, well, because life became like a minefield. Every time something happened, we had these lists, and we were comparing and running to 10s and 9s, and it became like this. We realized that really what was keeping us together was simply so consumed with the lists that we didn't have time to argue, you know? So it wasn't like we really got better, it just became, the list became now this new focus. Okay, after all this humor, but at this point they were already at a point where they really, this was it. Either they're going to stay together or they're breaking up. So I said to them, well, I want you to make one more list. I know, it sounds funny. But I said, no, do me a favor. We had enough with the list. Don't give us another list. So I said, no, this list is a completely different type of list. This is a list, we're going to call it not a list of needs, but a list of giving. What do you give? You see, the therapist was right in the sense where people have needs, and sometimes people don't understand other people's needs, or how important that need is and how little you're doing for it. But the assumption is that a relationship is based on needs. I have needs, you have needs, and if we can both mutually satisfy each other's needs, we've got a relationship. Something like a business contract. So it's worth for me to so-called give up my independence and my individuality because you give me enough and I'll give you in return. That type of transaction. I'm not suggesting there's per se a negative thing completely, but still there's a fundamental flaw in that. And definitely from a Torah point of view, what's fundamentally flawed there is that the whole thing is about me. The only thing is you satisfy me, so that's why I'm in it. But as soon as you start making a calculation that, I'm giving you more than you're giving me, the relationship is over, basically. It's just a matter of time. Love, from a Torah perspective, is not about needs. Yes, love satisfies needs. But it begins with what a person gives, not what a person takes. It's about, are you a giver or are you a taker? And that's where it gets much more challenging. Because most people in this world begin with being takers. And it takes real work to become a giver. It's true, some of us are born and wired to be giving. And some of us give actually out of weakness, just to be pleasers and satisfy others. It's not always coming from a healthy place either. But overall, to be a giver is the true secret of love. To have the courage to give even if you're not getting something in return. So you say, so why would I marry somebody if I'm not getting anything in return? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the idea of a relationship is transcendence. Not about more of yourself. Oh, that person is serving me. She's giving me this or he's giving me that. It's about going and finding in another person something you can never find within yourself. And respecting that. And that's a transcendent element that is potentially can be eternal. Needs can never be eternal because your needs are going to change and the other person will not always be able to provide your needs. So think of it this way. I don't want to even bring up this example, but I have to because it's just the only way to illustrate the point. God forbid, a couple, they love each other deeply. Then one of them gets very sick. Unfortunately, this happens. And they become incapacitated. And the other person loves them, so they're there for them. But you have instances after a while, it wears down the spouse. And they start saying, what is this? This was not the contract. I love this woman or love this man as long as they were there and I gave and they gave. And we were mutual. Now I've become a caretaker, a babysitter. Now some people out of guilt will not leave their spouse under those circumstances. But some do after a while. And you wonder, is this morally, are they doing the right thing or not? So all of us, of course, would love to be able to criticize and say, how could you do such a thing? You leave a person when they're like that, But let's talk about it purely mathematical, from a business point of view. If you're a partner with somebody in business and they're no longer functioning, why do you have to remain being a partner? Just loyalty? So of course the argument will be, well, marriage is not a business. I understand. But really, what does it mean? It means that love is a lot deeper than just you getting your needs met. When a mother stays up at night with her child who can't sleep, and she says, you know what, at some point I got to go to sleep because I got to go to work tomorrow, and you don't really care what happens to your child, what's wrong with that? Why is that not a proper calculation? Because love works by different rules. It's not about logic. It's not about, I'm going to give 5 hours a day to my child, but after that, I have other things to do. It doesn't work that way. Well, love is not a quantitative entity. I forgot where I read this, but there was this mother, there was a child in a daycare, in a school, in a child care center where news came to someone noticed, one of the teachers noticed that the little boy was love-starved. She saw he was very clingy, always needy, and recognized that he's not getting enough love at home. So the teacher called the mother in and decided the teacher was a woman. She said, so I have like a woman-to-woman talk in a sensitive way, not criticizing, just to bring to her attention that that your child seems to need a lot more love, hugs, embracing, and validation, or whatever. And the mother says, it's a surprise of the teacher, you're absolutely right. You know something? The psychologist told us this last week. So I've been telling our babysitter to hug the baby more, and she doesn't seem to understand. This was the mother's response. It's a true story, by the way. What's missing here is not only the babysitter doesn't understand, she doesn't begin to get it herself. The babysitter doesn't understand. The point is that unfortunately, whether it's due to the self-feeding media, or how we are all like the blind leading the blind, our attitudes and our standards about love and relationships, where does it come from? Yours and mine. Where do we learn about love? So, of course, the first place you learn about it is at home. But think of if your parents and your home was not exactly perfect love, so then that's your standard. And then it's reinforced in the media, on television, in books, in films. And a new standard is created, and then you start asking yourself, so why is it not working? One has to go to the beginning, go back to your initial point of departure. What is your standard? What do you think love is? And this is the most difficult thing to teach people. Because it's one thing if you can teach a child from young age what real, healthy, unconditional love is. But once we are adults, and it's already been shaped and we've been wired a certain way, and we have been and that wiring has been reinforced again and again, it's not a simple thing to suddenly tell someone, you know something, your whole view on love is screwed up. And there's another perspective. I mean, it's easy to say it, but it doesn't mean the person can hear it. That's why you need to do it very, very cautiously and sensitively. But essentially, when one really studies Torah, what's really happening is, as I said, it opens up new horizons, a new perspective. And if you have a little humility, it's called bittul, that you don't have it all worked out, a little opening like that, you'll be fine. That's all that's really required. The biggest enemy that we have is that we think we have it all worked out. Figure it out. When anyone tells me, I'm 35 years old, I'm 40 years old, I'm never going to be married. And I say, how do you know you're never going to be married? You're a prophet? They say, no, because I tried everything. Whenever I hear that, my heart drops. I said, everything? You tried everything? Who decided that you tried everything? The objective you? No one's objective in relation. How could you have tried everything? We're all subjective. We're all blind spots. It's a ridiculous statement. You've tried everything. I learned over the years not to use that word ridiculous statement, obviously. I'm just saying it here because I'm not speaking to anyone individually. And to teach someone, just to be able to get across to a person that you may not have it all worked out, not because you're not intelligent or because something's wrong with you, because the nature of the beast. We're all subjective, and especially when it comes to relationships. You know how many people have asked me to help get rid of an evil eye, a curse on them, because they're not, everyone they meet doesn't work out. So there must be a curse. And I have to tell them nicely, I said, well, how do you know? We have to first eliminate other options before determining it's a curse, But they're convinced it's a curse because it's convenient. That way you don't have to really look at yourself. You can blame others, you can blame someone cursed you, and that's it. And I can tell you from my experience, and not only my own, I've read it from previous Kabbalists and mystics, there is no such thing as a curse. It's a myth. Yes, there's a concept of an evil eye, but first of all it says that ayin hara, an evil eye, only affects those that believe in it. So let's start with that. So yes, of course you can bring upon yourself a curse by looking at yourself so negatively. So of course, who wants to date somebody that constantly thinks that there's a curse on them? Would you want to marry someone that's cursed? But the point I'm trying to make is that we have much more control than we think we have, and that terrifies people, by the way, because then you're responsible. And in a strange way, we'd like to find someone else responsible. And I'm not trying to be tough, but it's reality. Why are we so intrigued, for example, by exotica, like things like previous lives, dream interpretation? The Rebbe once told somebody who asked him to interpret a dream, and trust me, he knew how to interpret a dream. He was a true Kabbalist. He said to him, I have enough time trying to figure out my life when I'm awake. Let's first finish with that before we get to our dreams. That doesn't mean dreams don't have messages, but it can be a type of escapism when you go to the stars before you're down here on earth. Or you go to previous lives when you have to figure out your life right here. And when God wants you to find out what was in a previous life, He'll let you know. And when you put the right effort in, it'll be told to you if you need to know. And if you don't need to know, it means you don't need it for your well-being. Many people don't want to hear that. I remember in this class, it was a woman, years ago, she was an opera singer. She lost a child at a very young age, a child. She was like distraught. I couldn't really help her. How do you help a mother like that? So I was kind and friendly and tried to help her in any way, But she became so desperate, she was looking for something that I should help her find. She wanted to find the soul. She wanted to find some reincarnation where her child. And she kept insisting, and I was wondering, where's she getting these ideas from? And then she told me she met somebody who's telling her that for the right price, he'll help her find the soul of her child in some other child. For the right price is the emphasis. So she didn't trust in that guy, but she trusted me, but she believed that, so she wanted me to help. And I told her, I said, with all due respect, if I could do it, I would do it. But I don't, first of all, believe that's necessarily the case. And there are other ways to connect to your child, and so on. But this became her thing. Anyway, then she disappeared. A few years later, I met her, and she did go back to that guy, and he milked. She had money. He milked her for I don't know how much money. And she came back very, 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 very distraught from that, because she figured out that after a while he was a con artist. And she came to me. She didn't even remember that I had warned her, because I told her subtly. I didn't want to tell her blatantly. I told her subtly. She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, what are you supposed to say? But I saw, and again, I don't judge her because of her deep pain. She was desperate. But it's so easy to catch onto a crutch, hold on to a crutch. What? Sorry? A bug? What? What, like an animal? Like a crutch? Maybe it's a reincarnation of a soul that wants to... You didn't think that. That's a first. Hey. Anybody take him home? Okay. Can we go on? Okay. So I didn't judge her because she was coming from a very desperate place, and people like that are very vulnerable. And obviously, good con artists are very good at finding people like that. This doesn't mean there isn't deep mystical reasons for things, and there is other dimensions. It's all, however, comes down to one thing: does it make you more responsible or makes you less responsible? If it's some crutch or it's some escape, then it's usually not necessarily healthy. Even if there is some truth to it. You got now a fly by you? Okay. So to go and sum up what I was saying earlier about divorce, let me just say a few things. First of all, I don't know everybody's situation in this room, where you stand, where you have stood in life, but I will tell you this. Most divorces are a result of a complete distortion of what love is. It's not divorce becomes a solution. Yes, it's true that couple may have not married in the proper way in the first place. They both didn't know what love was. And then it just unraveled as a result. That is most situations. But the problem is not the divorce, the problem is with the love. And that's why the Torah makes it such an emphasis. It begins with let's look at the darker moment. Because how we look at divorce, that's how we look at love. Unfortunately, in our day and age, because love is so distorted and people don't have a healthy perspective on it, So divorce has become a very regular option. In the Talmud it says that the altar cries when a couple gets divorced. So there's always that joke they tell, this gallows humor. I can't resist saying it. Should I or shouldn't I? I don't know. It's not a really appropriate joke for this class. But, okay. So the guy, they're sitting and the rabbi tells them, you know that the altar is crying when you're coming here for a divorce. So the guy says, look, I've been crying for 30 years. Now the altar can cry a little. That's the joke. So there's a lot of divorce jokes to somehow take out this thing. But the point I wanted to make was that it's very sad because when I see the divorce rate and I see people that I deal with or what I witness or I just read about, to me the tragedy is not the divorce, the tragedy is the love, the lack of it, and the way people look at it. It's such a distorted perspective on it. So in a strange way, the Torah, recognizing that, says, you know what, I'm not going to begin by talking about love. Let's talk about divorce, the laws of divorce. And from there we'll learn, like when pressure and the difficult challenges teach you what love is. You want to know what love is? What Moses did on the mountain, where he was able to get a God to reconcile with the people after such betrayal, you know that's a person who understands what love is. Now, of course, we don't have to wait for betrayal to get to that point. But the point I'm trying to say is that love is a whole different dimension than the comforts or the easy definition of it that we are so almost frivolous about. You know, I fell in love, love at first sight. That's a movie about love. Oh, they're in love. They're not in love. You see people who will say they're madly in love with each other. 2 years later, they hate each other's guts. So what was it, love or was it not love? The answer is they thought it was love. Let's not confuse infatuation and obsession with love. It can take the shape of love. You know what love is? There was a Mrs. Sharfstein. She was a young woman in Brooklyn many years ago. She told me the story. I used it in Torah Meaning for Life. On the chapter on love, I told the story. So she went to see the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And she was a prime candidate for marriage, meaning she was very educated, she was good looking, she had all the qualities. And the Rebbe said to her, so what about thinking about getting married? She said, yeah, I'd love to, but I can't find the right guy. And the Rebbe suggested a few names from the yeshiva that she knew. And for each person, she had something else to say. This one's too brainy, this one's too emotional, this one's too short, this one's too fat, this one's too this, too that. Or the whole list. I don't know if that's exactly what she said, but you get the idea. For everyone, she had another problem. The Rebbe stopped her and started laughing and said to her, you know, her name is Chana. He said, Chan, you read too many books and you watch too many movies. Love, he told her, is not what you think it is. It's not that thing that people talk about, they fall in love. And this is the words of the Rebbe, and I'll explain it. Extremely profound. He said, love is what happens when two people choose to live a life together unconditionally, and they begin doing the little details in life that are not dramatic with each other for many, many years, there comes a point where they become inseparable. So let me explain this a moment, because this, of course, had a major impact on her, and I used it in the Torah Meaning for Life. Think of it like this. You plant a seed in the ground, a flower seed. And when you water it and you get rid of the weeds, slowly it begins to sprout and turns into a sapling that just breaks the earth, cracks the earth and emerges. And if you continue nurturing it, it will grow into a flower. And if you continue nurturing it further, it will grow into a tree. And one day when you look at the tree years later, that is what we call full love. Does that mean there's no love when you planted the seed or when the seed sprouted? Of course there is. But it's in its infancy. It doesn't have the maturity that comes with life experiences. You look for a partner in life, you're not just looking for someone that's going to make you happy for today and tomorrow. And you're also not a prophet. You don't know the future. So how do you know who this person, how could you choose a partner when you don't know what's going to be coming in your life? Who knows what kind of challenges we'll have? And how will that person be under those challenges? But God created us with a wisdom, an instinct if you wish, that you can date someone, and if you're serious and you're looking for something long-term, enduring, eternal, like a seed, you can figure out that this person is a partner I trust, that no matter what comes in our lives, we'll work it out together. That you could figure out. If you think that way, if you think in terms of that, but if you think of love as this momentary fireworks, or even for a short period, and that's your expectation, then you've already written your script. What do you think is going to happen when your whole standard is that? And what he was saying was that love is what grows the tree. That's when you really can call it love. Earlier you can call it the seed, the sapling, the flower, the stages. Each one is definitely a beautiful stage in life. And what really requires is really a reprogramming of our attitudes toward love. And it's, unfortunately, divorce today is, in a strange way, a catalyst to teach us deeper secrets of love. Because I see a trend. We're already now like a second generation of dysfunctionality, so to speak. And when people are miserable long enough, they hit rock bottom and they say, enough is enough. I really see this, and I see a contrast today and 20 years ago. I could say I'm old enough already to say that I make such a comparison. I couldn't do that a while ago. And I'll tell you the key difference I see, and not just the one person, I mean almost like a trend. I see a lot of people grew up in very broken homes. 20 years ago, more or less repeated the patterns. And today I see a lot of people say, I'm sick of it, and I want to have something healthy. Sometimes when you're deprived long enough, you find it through hunger. So in a strange way, maybe the divorce rate, in general, the deterioration of intimacy, relationships, there's also a silver lining, because it's a wake-up call. It's like when you see a crack in the system, it wakes you up, there's something wrong with the system. If there was no crack, people can just go through the motions and everyone say, hey, everything is great. So in many ways, I find that even though maybe sometimes it's to the extreme, dysfunctionality and therapy and people talking too much maybe, when once upon a time they talk too little, but in a strange way, there's, I think, a certain, the overabundance of so much confessionals that you hear on radio and on television and so on, is in a way a reflection of, an extreme reflection of a lot of misery going on. So I'm not here to measure the misery index. My intention here was to talk about, as I said, the positive side. So firstly, there is hope for all of you. There's no curse. There's somebody waiting for you. For those of you that are looking for a soulmate, someone's waiting for you, just like you're waiting for them. It may require a little rewiring of your program. To be very honest, you have to look at yourself and not just everybody else. And you may need a good, brutal friend, a trusting friend that can kick you in the pants and make you aware of some things that you just don't want to listen to. So it would be healthy to find someone that can do that, because that may be your salvation. It's enough, even though we'd like to hear from people who affirm and say you're doing everything right, but it's the people who will tell you honestly, and I don't mean maliciously, but people who care about you, who will show you the things you're doing wrong that can really help save your life. So in this month of Elul, which is a month of the sign of Virgo, the sign Psula, it's the month of love. I said, Anila Deidi V'Deidi Li. It's a good opportunity. And we are really walking in the footsteps, the path that Moses tread. He showed the way. He showed the way where he would not take no for an answer. You have to say to yourself, every one of us, that there's no such thing as impossible. I can find what I need in my life, love. I can find enduring love. Definitely need direction. But don't think that just because you may have suffered, or things have been broken, or disappointed, or even real divorce, or emotional divorce, and all that comes with it, or children of divorce, that your life is doomed. That is absolutely unacceptable from a Torah point of view. And just as Moses would not take no for an answer, your soul, you should tell yourself that your soul will also won't take no for an answer. And this is a period in time, if you talk about really retracing the steps of Elul, the high holidays, it's not just about doing tshuva on sins you did. It's about, can you build a real relationship in this world? Can you find real love in this world? I know you usually don't hear people talk about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in that context, but that's how I see it. If Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur can yield a healthy couple that will build love and build a tree, that to me is a real Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Unfortunately, it's been hijacked and somewhat distorted by this thing of, once a year where you have to confess your sins and make up with God, and if not God, who knows what He's going to do for you, how He'll judge you on this judgment day. It's about you and your relationships in life. That's what it comes down to. And this is not a new age take on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I say to you with the full authority that comes straight from the original sources of what Tishrei is about. It's about God reconciling and building a relationship with the people. And that's reflected in every relationship we build with each other. When a couple come together, two souls meet, that is like you meeting God. It is the divine image meeting the second half of the divine image. And that's the essence of love. Love is about a divine image in search for its partner. So on the macrocosmic level, it's about God and the people. On a microcosmic level, it's about each of us building our relationship. And you begin this month, and it builds day after day. And hopefully, with a little effort on our part, and God does His part, we can come away next year with actually finding something that's truly loving and enduring and transcendent, not just something that is temporary or based on need and so on. There's a lot more that I can say about this topic. It's not, I've hardly exhausted it, but I think the videotape is running out. I'm just kidding. There's no videotape here, is there? There is. Internet. But as they say, I think enough said, and now time to act. So I want to conclude on the blessing, since we're in this special month, that you shall find your anila deidis and v'deidi lis, your deidi, your love, beloveds, and they should find you. And we should, those of us that have already found our soulmates, and those that are happy, it doesn't mean you can rest on your laurels and just take it for granted. A relationship is a dynamic force, and it has to continuously grow. It is not something that just remains. As I said with the tree, it's a growing process. And I alluded earlier that just like about watering, which is nurturing each other, is the water that feeds love, there's also the weeding of the garden, getting rid of things in the garden of marriage or love that are negative forces that just tend to eat up energy and distract, and ultimately can cause damage to the flowers themselves. So may we all water each other properly, and may the flowers blossom in this month of Elul. Thank you very much. So again, I want to say the Kabbalah of divorce, the ultimate marriage was dedicated by Louis Malowski in loving memory of his father, passed away on the 12th of Elul, whose first yahrzeit rather was on the 12th of Elul, Eliezer Shmuel ben Matisyahu Chaim. I want to say on another note that tomorrow night, my colleague, as I mentioned earlier, and friend, many years a student of mine, very creative individual, very spiritual individual, will be teaching 7 o'clock here. I'll be here next Wednesday. And some of you have asked about the high holidays. We will soon be making a short announcement about what we're going to do for the high holidays. So, meanwhile, everyone, have a very pleasant week. Thank you.